I'm David Bodemer, the editorial director with National Real Estate Investor. We're here at the ICSC Recon 2012 show, and I'm here now with Linda Regan, who is the director of lease consulting with McGladrey. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
So why don't we start with what you're hearing from retailers, both at this show, but also kind of coming in.
Sure. Overall, retailers are getting the spring back in their steps again, finally, after a four-year period, a difficult four-year period, which started with the deep recession and has continued through a very long period of consolidating and closing underperforming stores, rethinking product, pricing, and inventory mix and strategies, and paring back expenses in every possible way. Overall, over the past year or so, the mood of the retail consumer has increased noticeably, and with it, the mood of the retailer has improved quite a bit. Revenues and profits in the retail sector, generally speaking, are up, and retailers are once again focusing on expansion, so that's all very good. But this time, unlike the last cycle, the boom of the previous decade, the optimism is cautious and controlled.
Okay.
Even as expansion is contemplated, retailers are still very careful about investments and about spend, making sure that it's reasonable and logical and makes business sense. What we find in our practice in particular is a real focus on controlling and minimizing, to the extent possible, lease and occupancy expenses.
Okay, so can you tell us a little more about that? What are the issues involved with the lease occupancy expenses for retailers?
Sure. A lease is a major financial commitment. Most retail leases run for a period of several years. They require the retailer to pay, a very significant amount of rent for the space itself, plus their proportionate share of common area maintenance, real estate taxes, insurance, utilities, and other expenses. And before the store can even open for business, you have to build it out and furnish it. So all of that totals hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of investment. It's a major issue, and it needs to be closely managed. And so tenants in particular are really focused on making sure that the investment is sound in the first instance and that they don't pay more than they should during the life cycle of those leases.
So what are the specific concerns retailers have about lease costs, and what are the risks that they face in looking at this?
There are literally dozens of ways that things can go askew during the term of a lease, but certain instances pop up more than others and pose a larger risk. The number one area by far is annual common area maintenance and tax reconciliations. The landlords have to do a year-end accounting, and very often there are issues. It's shocking to say, but most of these reconciliations at the end of the year contain at least one error, and usually more than that. And typically it's an overcharge in one way or another to the tenant. So the tenants need to be on guard for that. If the tenant itself or its representative is not actively monitoring those billings, the likelihood of overpaying and never catching it and never knowing it is very significant. It's a big bottom line impact. A second big area of problem is what we call missed kickouts. A kickout is a right in a retail lease where the retailer can kick out of or terminate a lease if the sales in the store don't meet a certain expectation, a defined threshold in the lease. It's a protection against being stuck with an underperforming store indefinitely. But in order to exercise that kickout, you need to know what the date and notice requirements are under the lease. And if the retailers don't have that information accurately tracked in a system of record and aren't monitoring it, it's very easy to miss that date and get stuck potentially with an underperforming store for months or years longer than they need to. A third area is in what is called operating co-tenancy. Landlords are required to keep any given shopping center at a minimum level of occupancy with stores that are open and operating for business. If it falls below that level at any point in time, those tenants that remain, that are open and operating, are usually entitled to a rent reduction or some other type of compensation. But oftentimes tenants don't have a way of monitoring landlords' compliance with co-tenancy. If they don't, the likelihood of a missed cost savings is pretty significant. And finally, retailers often are not in full command of expenses that are really either entirely or mostly the responsibility of the landlord to cover, such as parking lot repaving, roof repairs, other major infrastructural things. A lot of tenants pay for these repairs when they shouldn't and don't have to because they're not cognizant of what the lease calls for in that regard.
So what can retailers do to protect themselves against these kind of risks?
Well, the most important thing is to have full command of your lease information. We advise retailers to make sure that they have accurately abstracted lease information into a reliable system and to actively manage that information at all times. This active management can be done internally by the retailer, or they can use a third party like us to do that. But this has to be done, and it has to be a priority. In our practice, what we tend to find is that when it's not correct from the outset, when the lease is not properly abstracted and the data is not complete and correct in their system, the likelihood of experiencing the pain of a missed strategic opportunity like a missed option or overpaying is pretty significant. And this problem is not just a problem unique to retailers. Office tenants and industrial tenants have that as well. So the key is to have strategic command of your information.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you.
And continue to watch the videos in our series from Regan.